transitioning was a 10-month process for me. And, it was sort of the bane of my existence for that 10 months, give or take. Maybe the first few months it wasn't. But it was really important to me, and, my natural hair is important to me now, or else I wouldn't really be here talking to you guys about it. But, it was just an interesting time in my life, and a chapter that is thankfully closed. But obviously there are many, many, many more of you who are out there still living your journey and just starting on your natural odyssey, let's say. So I just have a few tips, and I just want to share a little bit of my experience and a little bit of what I felt would have been helpful to know while I was transitioning, to hear while I was transitioning, and some of this I did hear, but I didn't really believe, maybe. And if you want to hear what I have to say about what I think are the essential parts of transitioning and some tips, stay tuned. So I would say that the most important thing about transitioning and the most important thing about going natural is you have to be ready. So what that means for everybody might not look the same. For me, I came to the conclusion that getting relaxers was just no longer a good part of my life. The way I put it to people when they talked to me about it was that I could no longer justify having this process done to my hair anymore, because even though I started a healthy hair journey and I had some success with that, I was able to grow my hair to about armpit length, which was the longest I'd ever had it as an adult, through a relaxed healthy hair journey. And I was like, I'll never go natural. That's never me. Like, I definitely was not expecting to go natural during this time. And this was during college that I was able to achieve a pretty good amount of length, and a little bit after. But, once I graduated, I guess I don't know what it was. I guess I started dating, and I was flat ironing my hair to look good on my dates all the time, because, that's what guys like, right? Like straight, long hair. And so it just kept breaking, and I was almost back where I started at the end of that. And I just felt like I couldn't keep my hair healthy when it was relaxed. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing was that I hated the process of getting relaxed. I hated having to think about when I could scratch my head and when I couldn't, when I could wash my hair and when I couldn't, based on relaxers. Planning my life around certain events so that I had a fresh relaxer for those events. It just didn't make sense, and I hated the actual physical process of getting it done. My mom would do it for me, and we would just sit in our bathroom, and I would fight with her because I was so picky about how she should apply it, because I didn't want her to overlap it to make my hair even more unhealthy. And I had to put oil on my ends, and I had my own special thing. Like, I was just snapping at her, like, for trying to help me do this thing that she really felt in her heart, which is probably why she gave me relaxer at such a young age. She probably felt that it was, like, the best social thing for me, and probably more convenient for her, let's be honest, in terms of detangling. And I just hated doing it, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I was very, very ready. And so I think that the most important thing that you can possibly do for your transition is make sure that you're ready. I tried to transition one time before. I lasted about 3 or 4 months. I'm really sad because I probably would have like crazy long hair by now if I had just done it then. But I went into it with the wrong attitude. Some people go into a relaxer stretch and they end up going natural. Like, they either get frustrated and cut off their hair, or they just keep going because they find that it's so relatively simple to deal with their hair, or not really that big of a deal that they just keep doing, or they don't have enough money to get relaxers or whatever have you. Like, some people go into that, but I think that the best way to go into a transition is as a transition and not a relaxer stretch. Go in with your eyes on the natural prize, so to speak, because then you will be more motivated to get through those rough times. When I got about 3 or 4 months of new growth, when you're just getting past that point where you usually would, you're getting way past that point where you usually would relax your hair, and detangling was hard. If I was trying to flat iron my hair, it just wasn't working anymore. It just didn't look the same. And I was like, oh no, I can't do this. I can't survive without a relaxer. I went into this transition knowing the only way this transition is ending is with me chopping off my relaxed ends and being natural, fully natural for the first time since I was a kid. And I knew that. All that was on my mind is how long can I make this transition last so I can have the most hair possible coming out of it. But I knew I wasn't going to do something like a 2-year transition. I had a time frame in mind, and I would encourage that you do the same. Say, I'm going to transition for 2 years. I'm going to transition for 1 year. I'm going to transition for 6 months. Whatever you think is going to be good enough, however much hair you think is enough hair, just choose that time period and just have your mind on that. Now, as I did, I thought that I would be no less than a year transitioning. And I chopped at 10 months about post relaxer. It gave me something to focus on. It kept me from feeling like I wanted to relax my hair, and it kept me from chopping my hair too soon. I'm not going to say that I was immediately enamored with the shortness of my hair when I first big chopped, but I was at least able to deal with it. I can work with it, and I have like 4 inches of hair now, and that's what I have. So I'd say, be ready, pick a time period, and pick your path. Big chop immediately, or big chop in 10 months, in 11 months, in 15 months, in 18 months, in 22 months. Pick a time frame, stick to it as much as you can before you big chop, just so you know what to expect and you know yourself more than anybody does, and you know how you're going to feel comfortable and how much hair you need to feel okay. Watch YouTube obsessively during your transition, which is probably something you're already doing, and that's probably why you're here. I watched YouTube all the time. I found YouTube so great during my transition, watching and learning and absorbing and stuff like that, and it was great, and I loved it, and it really kept my eyes on the natural prize. Again, I'm going to say that. Seeing all these beautiful natural haired women on here, you know, doing really cool stuff with their hair, and you know, passing on a lot of knowledge and creating this sense of community was really great, and I really, really enjoyed that, seeing that, experiencing that, even if I wasn't, you know, really getting to know them on a personal level, it felt like I knew them. Just, I loved watching YouTube. It gave me a lot of information, and I think that you should just stick with this site and keep on watching. Wash in sections. I think that in terms of the sort of logistical, physical hair tips, probably the only hair styling, hair dealing tip I'm going to give here is to wash your hair in sections. As you know, once you wet your hair, your new growth is going to come back full force in whatever curl pattern it is, or non-curl pattern, or whatever texture it is, and you're gonna have to deal with that difference. So wash your hair in sections. Number one, it keeps the new growth a little stretched so that it's not at full curliness, and it's a little bit easier to deal with, and it's not as shrunken. It also helps you organize your hair, like facing a head full of thick new growth and a little bit of stringy relaxed ends is really overwhelming just psychologically. I'm actually getting a little freaked out just thinking about having to do that, and just doing it section by section, making sure that you can be really thorough with each section, with washing and conditioning and leave-in conditioning, and just dealing with your hair in nice organized pieces is really helpful for not getting overwhelmed and not quitting your transition, and really just keeping it going. So if there's nothing else that you change about the way that you treat your hair, although you should also not use heat on it, and you should moisturize it more often, if there's nothing else that you change about your hair routine now that you are transitioning, you should change the fact that you wash your hair as one piece of whatever. You should just treat it as 3, 4, 6, depending on how much thickness you have and much length you have. I only did 4 throughout most of my transition, and I found that very useful. And you know what, yes, it does take a little bit more time to wash one section, rinse it out, put it back together. You know, it does take a little more time, but I would say that it's totally worth it, because all of the time that you spend in the shower, you don't spend painfully detangling your hair. Like, yes, detangling gets rough, but it's not as bad as it is if you mat up your hair in this one big bush and then have to separate it and deal with it. Then it's the worst. And one thing that I'll say about going natural, it gets easier. Detangling gets so much easier after the big chop. I understand that, like, yeah, your hair isn't straight anymore at all, but I found that my relaxed ends were getting more tangled than my natural hair, and that's when I knew it was also time to chop. So there's a tip on when to know when you should big chop, is when your relaxed ends start getting more tangled than your natural hair. It's time to consider chopping, because those ends are just damaged and doing you no good and not even looking good. So get rid of them. And so this is my last real formal tip, is to just don't fall into the hair type hype. Hair typing is very useful for those who fall into very neat categories. If you're very much for A, if you're very much for C, if you're very much for B, if you're very much 2C, 3A, whatever. If you have this like prototype, this ultimate image of what that hair type is, hair typing is very useful for you, because you can find other archetypes and prototypes and whatever you want to say of that hair type, and you'll know exactly what your hair is going to look like. But if you're like me, and you're like many other people who have multiple textures on their head and don't see exactly the same hair texture in anyone else, on YouTube, on blogs, in real life, wherever, it's a little bit confusing, and it can be sort of frustrating. It can be frustrating because, you know, you're looking at your new growth and you're trying to decipher it, and, you know, you're trying to rationalize that it's the best hair texture you can possibly have, whatever that means, and then it ends up being something else that is less desirable, whatever that means, you know. I always thought that I'm 4A. I have curl pattern, right? Just because I could see waves forming. I don't know what I was thinking. But when I big chopped, well, before I big chopped, I had a sneaking suspicion that I was definitely not 4A and I was more 4B. Because I was not seeing a curl pattern when I was washing my hair or conditioning my hair or anything. Nothing was clumping together, nowhere. But then when I started to big chop and I put some gel on, I was like, oh, I have curls. But, you know, that's just what gel does. It creates curls. So then I was like sort of flipped back to reality again. Like, oh, yeah, no, you're more 4B, 4C. And I still don't really know what my hair type is. And honestly, as I've gone natural, I'm really starting to not care as much. Of course, I know that someone with a looser hair texture is not going to be as useful of a resource for me in terms of how to deal with my hair, but I'm not super caught up in what my hair type is, because it's my hair. I just have to learn what it does and what it wants, and that's the best thing I can do for it. Seeing other 4B, 4C naturals is useful in what they do and what they can do and what they can't do. But really, you just have to work with what you have, be happy with what you have, and think that what you have can be beautiful, even if it doesn't look like your favorite guru's hair. My hair is never going to look like Natural 85 or Mahogany Curls or Mahogany Knots. Like, my hair is never going to look like theirs. Their hair is beautiful, thick, and gorgeous. That's just never going to happen for me. But other things can happen for me, and I have to rock my stuff the way that I want to rock it. So just be happy that you have hair. Be happy that you can grow hair. And, you know, just don't get caught up in what other people have, because you're never going to have what they have. So that's probably the best advice that I can give, is just to chill out, don't worry about your hair type, and just listen to what your hair has to tell you. So I hope that you found these tips useful. I feel like as a new natural, I have a lot of things fresh on the mind about transitioning, and I'd really love to help any of you out there who are sort of feeling a little unsure or trying to work through a couple of things with your transition. All right, till next time, goodbye.